recording. And then live on Facebook. Here we go. Okay. And we are live. So welcome everyone to our webinar about the Portuguese Americans in the United States. This is the first analysis of the 2020 decennial census data and more. We have been anxiously awaiting this data for a few years now, and so we're thankful that we finally have it. And we hope that you find this presentation very interesting and insightful. Our presenter today is Dr. Dulce Maria Scott from Anderson University. She is also PALCUS's research consultant. She helps us with all of our research and surveys. So the two national index surveys that we have done. We've also done we did a survey many years ago about whether or not Portuguese in the United States should be considered Hispanic. And we also did one on voting trends. So she has been an indispensable resource, an asset to us and the community. In fact, I think we regard her as the premier researcher on Portuguese American community because she's been doing it for so long and has published quite a bit. We're also really proud to have in partnership for this webinar, CPAC, the California Portuguese American Coalition, and Fresno State's Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute. And joining us to represent both of those organizations is Dinesh Borges, as he is the head of both of them. So welcome, Dinesh, and welcome, Dr. Scott.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dulce.
I
want to welcome my students if I can. Thanks.
Oh, yes. Welcome to Fresno State students. Some of Dinesh's students are online, so thanks for attending. If you have a question, there is a Q&A chat in the Zoom console, or if you're watching on Facebook, you can just go ahead and pop your questions into the live feed, and we will try and get to them throughout the presentation. If you have additional questions after the presentation, you can just email us. And now to kick things off, we do have some welcome remarks by His Excellency Francisco Duarte Lopes, who is the Ambassador of Portugal to the United States.
The sound is off, I believe.
Oh, we're not. Okay, hold on. Oh, let me try and get the sound. Sorry.
The best way to exit the screen, and when you share at the bottom has
right. Got it. The joys of live.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
Of live. Okay, great. Let's try this again. I want to start it over. I'm going to go back. Okay. Here we go.
Queria cumprimentar todos os participantes deste webinar e desejar também sucesso, quer para este evento hoje, quer para a série de eventos que vão organizar, e dar os parabéns à PALCUS pelo óbvio sucesso da vossa campanha Make Portuguese Count. Relembrar também, aliás, que este projeto teve o apoio do Ministério dos Negócios Estrangeiros. É de facto muito importante mapear, estudar melhor, entender melhor os resultados deste censo e, aliás, ao perceber melhor, de uma maneira mais aprofundada, os resultados deste censo para a comunidade portuguesa é, aliás, também muito útil para nós, rede diplomática e rede consular portuguesa nos Estados Unidos. A nossa comunidade, como sabem, está muito bem enraizada nos principais estados americanos de destino da nossa imigração ao longo dos anos e ao longo até dos séculos. E como resultou claro também deste censo, confirmando as indicações que eu acho que todos nós já tínhamos um pouco, está agora também a distribuir-se por outros estados, como Texas, como a Flórida, por exemplo. Flórida, aliás, onde a PALCUS vai este ano organizar a sua gala anual. Queria apenas terminar com um pequeno desafio. Dado o sucesso como eu disse, muito óbvio da campanha da PALCUS Make Portuguese Count, pensem se não será possível, de uma forma diferente talvez, organizar um tipo de campanha orientada para reforçar o ensino da língua portuguesa nos Estados Unidos. Obrigado a todos.
Excellent. Thank you, Ambassador, for sending the message.
Queria
Oops,
cumprimentar todos os participantes deste webinar.
sorry. All right. And I think that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Dulce to share her screen and let's
Okay,
get into the data.
all right, so share screen. Let's see. I have to actually go to the beginning of the slides. So we are going to start with the 2020 decennial census national data. And then we're going to talk about individual states, perhaps not in as much detail as we are talking about the national data. So the Portuguese Americans are 1,454,262 in the United States.
So
And
Dulce,
that's,
we're not seeing your screen yet.
oh, wait a minute. Okay. We are having all sorts of technical.
Despite testing everything before we got on, you know.
Okay, so we are, in terms of the Portuguese American population, and before
Sure.
I go into describing
Still not
statistics,
seeing. We're
It's
still
not
not
showing.
seeing.
you still are not seeing?
No.
Okay,
You're not. There
There
we
we go.
there we go, okay.
And
Hey,
you just have to put into presentation mode. Yeah, there you go.
There we go. Okay, so let's start with the type of data that is offered and where we can find it, and also the uses for the data. So the Census Bureau supplies ancestry data tables from the 2020 decennial census at the following geographical levels: national, state, county, place, and census tract. And I will explain later what a census tract is. The data available for the 2020 census include both the total population count and the detailed demographic breakdown by age and gender. Socioeconomic and housing data are not included in the decennial census, but can be assessed at various geographical levels through the American Community Survey. And people ask me, what is the difference between the American Community Survey and the census? The decennial census is a count of the entire population that is constitutionally mandated for the main purpose of congressional apportionment, although it can be used for other purposes. Since the data is collected every 10 years, it becomes outdated quickly. As such, the American Community Survey collects demographic, socioeconomic, and housing data every year to keep Americans updated about the American population. The data is presented every year, and it's also aggregated into 5-year samples, which become more accurate because the sample size increases if you aggregate 5 years of data, but it becomes less current because if you adding again the 5 years of data, then you're going to have data that's not current included in the sample. Now, in terms of uses for the data, it can be utilized by various entities, including community organizations, associations, and schools that cater to the Portuguese American community, businesses that offer products and services to Portuguese Americans, enabling the former to pinpoint their target markets. And for these objectives, it is advisable to utilize data at the census tract level. And I will explain that later and will show in the map how that works. It can be sourced both from the 2020 census and the 5-year American Community Survey. Additionally, the data may prove valuable for ascertaining the number and attributes of Portuguese Americans within congressional and state legislative districts, as well as determining the number and attributes of Portuguese Americans within consular territories with data available at various geographical levels. So we're going to start with the national data and then spend some time on the top 10 states in the United States. And so we are almost 1.5 million people in the United States. And although that's only 0.44% of the American population, that does not mean that we don't have a lot of political, socioeconomic and cultural influence in the United States. We do because we are concentrated in given areas. So we have a lot of impact in those areas where we are concentrated. There is a gender gap in the Portuguese American community, which is common in most societies in the United States. In these slides, I copied these from a page in the Census Bureau website, where they show the Brazilian population at over 500,000 and Cape Verdeans at over 113,000. And these are important populations for us because they are also from Portuguese-speaking countries, and it has impacts for the teaching of Portuguese, as well as for potential activities that we may engage together as populations from a Lusophone background. And in the site, it's stated that Brazilians are concentrated in Massachusetts, although they also in many other parts of the United States, and Cape Verdeans both in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Looking at the ancestry of Portuguese Americans, we see that 41.4% are of single ancestry. So the majority of us are of mixed ancestry. The census calls single ancestry Portuguese alone, and then mixed ancestry Portuguese alone, and well, a mixed ancestry Portuguese in any combination. And this is the age, and there are a few, the age distribution, and there are a few interesting things here. When you look at the population that's 55 to 59 years old, it's about almost the same as the population that's 10 to 14 years old. And then the other issue that is interesting is that we have more males, and then in the 1920s, we begin to have more females. And people have asked me, why is that? The sociological explanation that I can think of is that men tend to live more dangerous lives than women do. More likely to go to war, to engage in violence and crime. In fact, the ages at which men engage in violence and crime peak at the late teenage years and the early 20s. And that's when then you begin to have the inverse gender gap. And so they're also less likely to seek medical care. And, men tend to not want to do that. And so this is the younger age brackets, and they constitute 32.2% of the Portuguese American education. And so this is the population that we need to invest in terms of education.
It's a big number.
Yeah, it's a big number. So keeping that in mind. And now I want to talk about immigration from Portugal because it impacts the demographics of the Portuguese American population in the United States. It also impacts the ability to maintain the Portuguese culture, as well as a Portuguese diaspora in the United States, or Azorean diaspora in some areas of the United States. And as you can see, since the 1970s, we've had a sharp decline in immigration. And my understanding is that now we have between 700 and 800 a year. That's a drop in the bucket. In terms of comparison, for example, immigration from Portugal to Switzerland in 2022, there were almost 10,000 people going, right? Compared to other 700 to 800 people here in the United States. And so this leads then to the population pyramids. And when you look at this pyramid, you have just about as many people that are old as there are young. And this is more or less what we call a stationary pyramid, where the population is stable, it's maintaining itself, but it's not growing. And I think that's what describes Portuguese Americans currently.
Which could be seen as good news, yeah, as opposed to us
It could be seen
declining,
as
right?
good news,
Mhm.
because this is what, for comparison, so that we can understand our pyramid a little better, this is Portugal. And as you can see, the largest generation is between 45 to 49. And since then, with the exception of this year, maybe these are children of that group there, it's been declining every year. And that's what's called the constrictive population pyramid. In fact, the estimates are that by the end of the 21st century, the Portuguese population will have declined to 6,000. And it's even worse in countries like Italy and some other European and Eastern European countries. On the other hand, this is an expensive pyramid where people the population just keeps growing. There's a lot more young people than there are older people. The United States is also stable, but for the sake of time, I will skip that. But this was the pyramid that sort of really impressed me quite a bit. These are immigrants from Portugal. And what this tells me is that people may be immigrating 700 to 800 a year, but maybe they're not bringing children with them. And then if they immigrate before they have children, if they have children when they're here, then they'll be counted as Luso descendants in the United States. So this really is interesting, because I really think that the future of the US population in terms of how many immigrants from Portugal live here, as well as the ancestry mixtures, will come to mirror Hawaii, where a very small number of people are born in Portugal there, and a small percentage of people are of single ancestry. So moving on, this is where we are in the United States. And as you can see, we are concentrated in the northeastern states, particularly Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and then in California, but you can see how much more spread out the population is in California. And in Hawaii, I also put Alaska here, and Puerto Rico. And you see some movements to Washington, Texas, and then Florida, Chicago, but I didn't include Illinois as one of the states that we look at, and then Maryland near DC. So being concentrated in these areas gives us more socioeconomic power and political power and cultural power, as well as allows us to maintain our culture and communities in these areas. This is the Portuguese American population by state, and as you can see, they remain largely concentrated in the states of traditional settlement, with California, Hawaii, Massachusetts, and then New Jersey and Rhode Island as the traditional states of settlement. But you also see the movements to Florida, and then to Washington, to Texas, and so forth. And I included this graph here of the population that is of single ancestry, because then you can compare the states, and you see that states like California and Massachusetts come closer together when you consider people that have ancestry, the same Portuguese ancestry on both sides. And then New Jersey is pretty high, Rhode Island, Florida, but Hawaii really becomes small when it comes to people of single ancestry. Now, Portuguese Americans across the decades, this is data from the 1980, 1990, 2000, and 2000 census, and then the 2000 American Community Survey, microdata, and then 2020, the 2020 census. So the 2020 census is the first time that there is an actual count of the entire population. In the 1980, 1990, and 2000 census, they had a short form and the long form. The short form was given to the entire population, and the long form, which asked for the ancestry and the socioeconomic data, the housing data, etc., was given just to a sample. So this is a very good development that we have for the first time a count of the entire population. Now, these are Portuguese American in top states from 1980 to 2020. And here we can see the movement, how it is declining in the states of traditional settlement, maybe with the exception of New Jersey, quite a bit in Rhode Island, quite a bit of a decline also in Massachusetts. And then you see Florida growing quite a bit. Hawaii, this is a strange development that it's growing so much. I think part of it can be attributed to the efforts of the Make the Portuguese Count campaign, but also because of the different methodology that the Census Bureau used to ask ancestry in the 2020 census, which allowed people to write in more than 2 ancestries. So you see the growth in the other states, but we remain concentrated, which is a positive thing for the maintenance of our culture and of the diaspora. And these are the areas, the counties and then the cities that have the highest population. And Bristol County in Massachusetts is the highest county. And you can see the others as well. And then when it comes to the cities, Fall River and New Bedford are the largest. In the past, these cities used to have a lot more Portuguese Americans, but many descendants have moved to suburban areas. So they still counted in Bristol County, for example, but not in the city. And you can see the size of the city. California has 3 of them that are large, and it also has 4 counties, which shows how more spread out the population is in California as compared to, say, Massachusetts. And these are the Portuguese consular territories by state and then by total population. And as you can see, San Francisco is very large. It has 570,000, and it covers all of these states. And then Washington covers even more states, but because the Portuguese are not really concentrated, settled in the Midwest, for example, it's less people for the consulate in Washington, D.C. Then we have Newark, which covers Pennsylvania and Delaware and Newark. And then we have New York, which covers New York, Michigan, and Connecticut. And then Boston covers Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and parts of Boston. And then the New Bedford consulate covers parts of Massachusetts and also Providence. And in Providence, we have a vice consul, but I don't think they offer all the services in Providence. I think some services you can, if you live in Rhode Island, you have to go to New Bedford to get them.
Quite a justification to have more. Maybe another consulate in the western part of the United States.
Well, you have to also look at those populations that say live in Washington need a lot of consulate services. You have to look at the size of the population, but also at the amount of services that population might need, right? And I think that people that are either first generation or second generation might need more services than people who are fourth generation. And so, but anyway, that's
just a comment, if I can, Dulce. It would eliminate a lot of situations that there's just another honorary consul for Utah, if honorary consuls could actually have some abilities to do some work. When I mean abilities, not the people doing them, I'm one of them, but the authorization by the Portuguese government to do some consular work, because there's now honorary consuls in Utah, in Arizona, in a couple of cities, and 3 other cities in California besides the consul general. And I would think that there probably will be soon some in other states. Washington, Idaho, as you mentioned. Idaho is an area that's growing immensely with immigrants. Still a lot of first generation that set up their dairies there from California. So it would just be interesting to have because the honorary consulates, the way they exist now, even if we put another one in Colorado or Washington State or somewhere in Idaho, without any ability to do any kind of legal work, including the citizen's card, which is what most people are interested in. It's kind of something that we're there, but we aren't able to perform some of the duties.
So you're there to provide information?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
we can provide
basically
information, but that's basically it. We can say here, email the consulate general in Portugal and San Francisco, because they're the ones that can do the work, which is of course not the consulate's fault. I'm sure the consulate would love to have honorary consuls that could do work that would alleviate some of the backlogs that have occurred in the past, that are not now, unfortunately, but that have occurred in the past. But anyway,
so you'd agree that there's a need for more consulate offices in the San Francisco territory?
Well, obviously, if you have 570, and Rhode Island has 83,000, definitely. Or
yeah, but it's a vice consul that can provide some services, but not all of them, right?
Provide the basic services that people are looking for. Yeah, but anyway, that's topic for another discussion. But indeed, that proves that right there. What consular service, I mean, not even the embassy in the Washington, D.C. consular service has half of that population, which is, also interesting why they have Texas. I've always thought that was interesting, and not the West Coast.
So you think Texas should go with San Francisco?
We're here to, of course, listen to your expertise. So sorry for interrupting.
No, but I was curious about that, and I know that you are an honorary consulate, so you need that consul, so you need that information about that. Okay, so let's move on. Who are the Portuguese Americans? And here I'm going to use American Community Survey data, because I want to go beyond the demographics and also provide some educational and employment data and income as well. And so you see a different number here, and of total Portuguese Americans, and that is because it's based on a sample, but also because a lot of people did not indicate what their ancestry was. And as a result of the Make the Portuguese Count campaign, a lot more people indicated their ancestry in the 2020 census. But based on the people that did indicate their ancestry, then we have 13% from Portugal, 9.7% of Luso descendants born in other areas of the Portuguese diaspora. And I'm going to call them immigrant Luso descendants later on to make more space in the tables. And then the US born Luso descendants, who are the bulk of the Portuguese American population. I just have to say that people born in Portugal, I counted all of them because this is microdata that we allowed to download it. We don't have to make the tables on the Census Bureau website. And so I was able to count everyone that said that they were born in Portugal, regardless of whether they indicated their ancestry or not. And, wait a minute. Okay, this is the percent change going from 2005 to 2021. And as you can see, it indicates a growth until 2010 of all of these populations, and then a decline of both the immigrants from Portugal and the Luso descendants, but a tremendous growth of the people from other areas of the Portuguese diaspora. And you might want to ask me, who are these people from areas?
Yeah, I saw this slide, Dulce, and I was shocked. I wouldn't have even thought about this group. So yeah, where are they coming from? Canada or France?
So about 59% are coming from Brazil. So we had a long history of immigration to Brazil. So there's a lot of people born in Brazil that still declare their ancestry as Portuguese. And then there's a lot of people coming from other Latin American countries like Venezuela, Cuba. We also have people from Mexico. And that's why Spanish is the second largest language spoken at home by Portuguese Americans. And then we have people coming from South Africa.
Spanish is the second most popular language after English.
No,
No.
I should say third, because
Third,
English
okay,
is
okay,
first.
okay.
I should
So,
say
so,
second.
so right next to Portuguese is Spanish, and that's very interesting.
Right, it's English,
very
and then
good.
Portuguese, and Spanish. Yeah.
Yeah, because yeah, it's very interesting. I know quite a few families. These are anecdotal situations,
Yeah.
but I do know quite a few families that they speak both. They're trilingual.
Yeah. Well, if you're born in Venezuela, you're just as likely to speak one or the other.
Mhm.
And then we have people coming from South Africa, from various areas in Africa. So some Portuguese Americans speak African languages. And then we have people coming from the Middle East, Asia. And so we have people also that speak Asian languages. And then we have people coming from European countries other than Portugal. So some speak French at home. We have people from Canada and also from Bermuda. But the largest portion is from Brazil. And that has a lot of implications for who speaks Portuguese at home in the United States and the need to teach Portuguese as a language of heritage. Let's move on. And this is here where about 27,363 people did not indicate their ancestry. I was able to count them because they were born in Portugal. And then we have no idea how many of the Luso descendants born in other Portuguese diaspora areas or born in the United States that did not declare their ancestry in this survey. But you can see that when it comes to the born in the US Luso descendants, only 33% have a single ancestry. And they tend to be concentrated in the states of later immigration, like Massachusetts and New Jersey. In fact, New Jersey has the highest percentage of people that are of single ancestry, about 60%, followed by Massachusetts.
Interesting.
Yeah, followed by Massachusetts at 50%, and then Rhode Island and Connecticut at just over 47%. Okay, so this is the same thing, but in a chart format. And as you can see, there are people in Portugal also that are of mixed ancestry. You know, Portugal is also a country that receives immigrants. And so some people may have mixed ancestry, Portuguese and something else, or they may have an ancestry that's not Portuguese at all. So I'm going to move to education, and I only put a chart. This chart compares the education of the various categories of Portuguese Americans to all Americans. And all Americans in 2021 were at 35% having a college degree or higher, or a bachelor's degree or higher. Luso descendants overall are close to them. And then the Luso descendants of mixed ancestry are higher than the Luso descendants of single ancestry. And then people coming from other areas of the Portuguese diaspora have very high levels of education. And this is reflective of a bimodal type of immigration where some people come with a lot of education and occupational skills and are able to move into the middle class occupations, whereas others from this population also come with low levels of education and occupational skills and go into the low service sectors of the economy or the traditional immigrant occupations. So here,
can I ask you one question on that
sure.
slide, if I may? It's okay. I mean, if you can't go back, no.
Oh, you want me to? Okay.
Yeah, that one right there. So the Luso descendants born in other areas of the Portuguese diaspora, those that have the 49%, that's a significant. Right. As you mentioned, these are folks that sometimes even come over here to do a doctorate or to
exactly.
to do a master's and then stay, or are sometimes even contracted by multinational
companies, exactly,
all over the world. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, you may think that's really high, but among the Chinese American population, 57% have a college degree or higher. And so in some with some Asian populations, like Asian Indians, it's even much higher than that, right? So it's not that high when you compare it with those populations. We were here. And so the first line, management, business, science, and arts. This is the sector that I call the stable middle class sector. Generally, you're going to need education to be in these occupations. These includes like college professors, scientists, business people, managers, and so forth. Although you may not need education for all of these occupations, you mostly do need education for them. And then, as you can see, the last two rows are the traditional immigrant occupations in natural resources and then production and transportation. And you see that the immigrant generation has a higher percentage of people involved in those occupations and a lower percentage of people involved in the, I'm going to call it the stable middle class sector. But then because the Luso descendants from other areas of the Portuguese diaspora have very high levels of education, they have a higher presence here. But the Luso descendants in the US also have higher percentages than the American average. And then the next slide is on income. In terms of the average household income, those born in Portugal have a slightly lower lower income than all Americans, but in the family income, all categories of Portuguese Americans have higher levels of income than the average for America, which all of this shows that we are very well integrated socioeconomically. And in part, that explains our big rate of biological integration, because when we move into the mainstream economy, the educational institutions, and then the major organizations within the economy, we meet and interact with other people of other groups, and we then likely to fall in love and marry and have babies. So on the issue of people who speak Portuguese at home, as you can see here, both the number on this side and the percentage on this side of those who speak Portuguese at home among immigrants and among the US-born Luso descendants, it is decreasing from 2005 to 2021. And so nowadays about 7.6% of US-born Luso descendants speak Portuguese. It's remained sort of stable among those, the immigrant Luso descendants. And so who speaks Portuguese at home? As you can see, mostly people born in Portugal, but then the immigrants from the other areas of the Portuguese diaspora, and then born in the United States is 7.6. And overall, it's 22.2% of the Portuguese American population that speak Portuguese. And although some claim that there has been an increase, yes, there was an increase from 2015 to 2020 due to that immigration that came from Brazil and other countries where they speak Portuguese. And since English is not their first language, they speak Portuguese at home. But these 22%, it's actually quite lower than it was, say, in 2000 or 2005. So,
if I may,
yeah.
I mean, and this is a very interesting slide for anybody that wants to really, really reflect. And I know Angela and I, Mr. Ambassador just, said that our next cause, or I should say ours, because I'm a member, but I'm not on the board of PALCUS, should be the Portuguese language, which has been a cause for PALCUS for many years now. As Angela knows, we've been dealing with this issue, including the Star Talk, when it was cut abruptly here a few years ago, and we fought so hard and couldn't get it back on. But 22%. That means that indeed, we would love to have the other way around, 76%. But the idea is that if you want to reach the majority of those Americans who are of Portuguese ancestry in California, almost 88%, you better speak to them in English, or else you're not going to get to them.
Yeah, that is true. But let me just say something about this indicator, because the question in the census questionnaire is, or the ACS questionnaire is, what language do you speak at home? But it is supposed to be a measure of linguistic assimilation of the immigrant population and their descendants into the United States and into the English language. It's not supposed to be a measure of how many people speak a given foreign language in the United States. And that's very important to understand, that this is totally an undercount of how many people speak Portuguese in the United States. One, because people like me, I speak Portuguese, but I don't speak it at home because my husband is not Portuguese. I'm sure that a lot of your students don't speak Portuguese at home because the people
one of their parents is not Portuguese. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also does not count the number of people who are not Portuguese, who are learning Portuguese in the United States, right?
Which is an overall majority, indeed. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, this does point to the need to continue to teach Portuguese as a heritage language, as opposed to a foreign language. But as you were saying, Denise, there's more people learning Portuguese as a foreign language rather than as a heritage language, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And most of those, as in California, at least at all levels, are not Portuguese.
Right.
I mean, all levels. I'm talking about high school and college level.
Yeah. So the Portuguese language is much more widespread than these data show, because this data is asking only people of Portuguese descent.
Right.
Okay, so let's go to the top 10 states with the largest Portuguese American population. And I put this chart here just to remind myself of in which states Portuguese Americans are most integrated and in which they are least. And so the ones with the highest level of education, Connecticut, Florida is a special case. They're higher than the average for the state, so I put them in this column. And then New Jersey, New York, Texas, and Washington. And then in the traditional states of settlement, with the exception of New Jersey, you have California, Massachusetts, and Hawaii and Rhode Island that are below the state average for education. But let's start with California, and I'm going to see if I can show this map online. And here it is online. It's interactive online. So you can see where this is by census tract, and you can see where the Portuguese Americans are concentrated here. And then these blue lines are the congressional districts. And so, for example, you see here that in District 9, there's some Portuguese, but they are like divided in the middle here. Then you can see how many Portuguese there are in each district. So you may want to talk with the people that are representing those districts in Congress and alert them to this population. Also, I mean, in terms of politics, even if you're a small percentage of the population, all you need is that 1% or even a percentage of a percent that's going to put you ahead of your opponent, right?
Yeah, this data is really helpful when we are inviting new members of Congress to join the Portuguese American Caucus, which is in the House of Representatives, and then also the Friends of Portugal in the Senate. We do, on our website, we have a list of those congressmen and women that are currently part of those two groups. So if anybody's curious if their representative is part of the caucus or the Friends, you can go to our website and look. But yes, we're sort of continuously using this data to invite new members. So it's a good thing, great thing to point out. Dulce, thank you for including this.
One question, Dulce, right there in the middle. All right, that's okay. Go ahead, continue.
No,
please.
in terms of the population in California, we are only 0.88% of that population. But given the concentration in given areas, that gives us more power and more say in those areas where we live. The same gender imbalance, the same thing with as almost as much as older people as younger people. And you see that in this stable population pyramid. And in terms of education, you see that the Luso descendants are below the state average, and all Portuguese in California are below the state average. Although you then see that they higher than the state average by a little bit in the stable middle class sector of the economy. And I attribute this to the high rate of successful businesses in California, that although people may not have a lot of education, they fall in the stable middle class because of their business endeavors. Now let's go on to Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts, I want to go to the map online. And the congressional districts are not there, so let me put them. And here you see the concentration in Bristol County, but you see that our population here is divided right in the middle between two districts, between District 4 and District 9. And so some people might say, well, that's good because then we have influence in two districts as opposed to just one, if we all fell into one. But at the same time, it should be good if we were all in one, because then maybe we could elect a Portuguese American representative from Massachusetts, which we have not been able to do so far.
We have one Portuguese in Congress now from Massachusetts, Dulce, Loretta Trahan, right? She's from Massachusetts. I don't know which district she's from off the top of my head.
Yeah, I had a little bit of trouble with listening to what you said because there was a breakage. I don't know if it's just on my side or if it is also on your side. But I wanted to explain why it is that for community organizations, it's best to use census tract data. So, for example, this is Connecticut, this is Hartford, and each of these thingies here is a census tract. And if you zoom in, then their numbers begin to appear. And so let's say that I'm a community organization and I identify my population, say in this neighborhood, and most cities tend to have distinct neighborhoods. And so what I have to do is to add the data from each of these tracts that cover my neighborhood. Let's say I want to offer services for the elderly. Then, my neighborhood has these census tracts here. I'll add them up to know how many there are by census tract. Because when you write a proposal for funding, one of the first things they're going to ask you is for you to prove that there's a need for your services. And the first thing you need to present is how many people are going to be using your services. Of course, you also need to know what other services are being provided in that community to show in your funding proposal that there's not competing services covering that community. Same thing if you are offering, say, I want to start a after-school program, and in this specific neighborhood that's covered by this specific census tracts, then you can get the number of children, their ages, and then make a case for why it is that there's a need for your program. Now, for school districts, there's data at the school district level, but not for Portuguese Americans. So if we want school data for school districts of Portuguese Americans, we have to use the American Community Census. So let me, let's go back to the slides. So Massachusetts, they are 3.78%, and that's one of the highest percentages that we have in addition to Rhode Island in a given state. Same gender imbalance, the same age distribution, similar, not exactly the same, and then similar pyramid. And then when we look at education in Massachusetts, Portuguese Americans and Luso descendants, and even the immigrant Luso descendants, are way below the level of education for Massachusetts, and also way below the level of the percent that's in the stable middle class area in Massachusetts. Then we go to Hawaii, and I also want to go do Hawaii here online. And as you can see, Hawaii has two districts, District 1, and the rest is all District 2. And Honolulu, here, this is Honolulu over here, District 1, there's some Portuguese there, but there's more Portuguese in District 2. Anyway, just an interesting thing. I mean, the person running from both of those districts should pay attention to the Portuguese American population.
One thing I thought was interesting about Hawaii is that I know that the generations there are pretty far removed, but people reporting, it's almost the entire state, right? And
Yeah.
I realize that it's a small state, but still, it's like
Yeah,
almost the little
it's a lot of
states.
people, yeah.
Yeah,
And some of them probably were not reporting it in the American Community Survey, but
Right.
they then started reporting it in the 2020 survey,
right.
which led to then Hawaii being the third largest state. So by gender, it's interesting, this is the closest that we come in terms of men and women, and we are 6.25% of the state. A very different age distribution there, and I think in part is because they don't have that older immigrant generation. They're not affected by the same immigration trends as the Portuguese American, the states in the mainland land are. Interesting distribution. So the Portuguese Americans are very, except for the immigrant Luso descendants, are very much below the state average when it comes to education, as well as percent in the middle class, and although that's very high among the immigrant Luso descendants. And then moving on to Florida, I will stay here with Florida. You can see that we're very spread around Florida. We do have some concentrations in some districts, but you got to pay attention to what numbers are included in this bracket, whereas in Massachusetts, each tract has close to 3,000 people, and census tracts go from 2,000 to 8,000 people, the majority of them falling somewhere in the middle, like 4,000 or something like that. And so you can see these are small numbers, but as people keep moving there, there's going to be more of a presence, more cultural things happening that are Portuguese and so forth. So we a very small percentage of Florida, big sex imbalance, and this is because of the aging population. The older you are, the more women there are. And so you see the largest age group in Florida is 55 to 59, which reflects the aging population there. And then you see that in the pyramid. And in Florida, except for the immigrant Luso descendants, Portuguese Americans are below, US-born Luso descendants are just above the average for Florida, and they are above the percentage for the middle class, the occupations in the middle class. So Rhode Island, you see Rhode Island has a lot of Portuguese people. These census tracts have up to 2341 per tract. And we are concentrated in District 1, although we also have quite a bit of a presence in District 2. And then a big gender imbalance. I think maybe younger people are leaving Rhode Island, which then leads to older people staying and women outliving men. And this is the state in which we have the highest percentage of Portuguese Americans is Rhode Island. And so you see, again, the older age brackets are higher than the younger age brackets, the pyramid. And then we're doing really badly educationally in Rhode Island compared to the state average. And it's also interesting that the immigrant Luso descendants, like in Massachusetts, are not doing very well in Rhode Island. Their presence in the management business and science and arts occupations is really low. And it's also low for the Portuguese. And then New Jersey, you see where we are concentrated in New Jersey. You see the districts. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but as you move on with your, your work with the Congressional Caucus, you can use these data. And so in New Jersey, we are a small percentage of the Portuguese of the state population, and it is also higher among the higher age groups. This is an aging population as well. And when you look at it, then you see that US-born Luso descendants have a huge level of education in New Jersey. This is the only state where they outperform the immigrant Luso descendants, and they have a huge presence in management, business, science, and arts. And as you see here, they're the ones that have the highest rate of single ancestry among all the states. And then New York, we don't have a very big presence in a state that's so large like New York. But New York came up as one of the largest cities for Portuguese Americans, but you can see the districts in which we are concentrated here. And then New York so we very small percentage of New York because it has over 20 million people. And but the interesting thing is that this population in New York is around this age group, which suggests, the 25 to 30 to 34, which suggests to me either immigration from Portugal of people that are in these age groups, or migration within the United States of people from other states into New York. So this is a different type of pyramid, and under 5 is actually higher than in the other places. So you see this growth of this population. These might be the children of these larger groups over here. And then in terms of education, we're doing extremely well, particularly the immigrant descendants, and the presence in the middle class is outstanding. So Connecticut, this is Connecticut, and as you can see in Connecticut, we have some concentrations, not as high as in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, but like in District 3, we fall over there, District 4, District 5, and I think this is District 1. As you know, congressional districts have very strange lines, like this one comes around here and goes like that. Yeah, gerrymandering for you. So we are 1.39% there. Again, there's a little bit higher populations in the lower bracket levels, which indicates in-migration there. And then we are doing very well in terms of education in Connecticut, and also in terms of, for the immigrant Luso descendants, in terms of occupations in the middle class sectors. But for the Luso descendants, they are a little lower than the state average. And I don't really know what explains that they get educations, but then, I don't know, do they go in other types of jobs or whatever. And then Texas, and I want to go online for Texas. And as you can see, Texas, people are concentrated in these urban areas. I believe this is Fort Worth and Dallas up here. And then there's Austin and San Antonio and Houston over here, right? I think I'm right. But you see that the concentration is very small, 52 to 72 people per census tract. But it is an interesting concentration in urban centers, which means this is going to be an highly educated middle class population. So we are just 0.4%, 0.4%. And, I mean, the population of Texas is huge. It's over 29 million. This gender imbalance is high. I don't know why. And as you can see, there's more people in the younger ages categories, a lot of people in the working age category, and not a lot of older people, which suggests migration into this state. That's the population pyramid.
That would follow. Sorry, Dulce. Sorry, Dulce. I was just going to say, I think the younger population, I think that would map to people in general, like Texas is one of the states that people are moving to, right? So yeah. I know quite a few people that have moved for jobs, that moved from California to Texas. So I think that tracks with the general trend. Yeah. And then in terms of education, extremely high for the immigrant Luso descendants, very high for the US-born Luso descendants. Even those born in Portugal tend to have a higher level of education than those born in Portugal in other states. And you can see that we have a very huge presence in the middle class occupations, whereas in the state it's only 37.3%. So we are doing extremely well in Texas.
And then the last one is Washington, and I also want to go online for Washington, where you see the concentration also in urban centers. So it's going to be a similar dynamic to the one that we find in Texas. So let's go back here. And so we are a very small percentage of that population, 0.36%, this gender imbalance. But again, you see a lot of people in the working age group, the pyramid. And then in terms of education, Luso descendants are doing very well. Immigrant Luso descendants are not doing as well as the US-born Luso descendants there, but they have a very high presence in the business and management area. Okay, so that's it for the data. Let me read my conclusions. Congratulations to the Make the Portuguese Count campaign for its commendable efforts in raising awareness within the Portuguese American community about the importance of identifying their Portuguese ancestry when filling out the Census 2020 form. In previous ACS surveys, a significant number of individuals with Portuguese ancestry neglected to acknowledge their heritage. In the 2020 census, nearly 150,000 more individuals identified their ancestry compared to those who had previously reported their ancestry in the ACS surveys. Portuguese Americans, while displaying a certain degree of geographic mobility, seem to maintain a concentrated presence in the geographical areas of initial settlement. Therefore, even though they may not make up just 0.44 of the entire American population, their concentrated presence within specific states and jurisdictions within those states grants this population a greater level of cultural, socioeconomic, and political influence than what might be initially evident, the social density necessary for the preservation and replication of their cultural traditions.
So I think that slide that you were talking about there, the one previous about our cultural and socioeconomic and political influence, I think that coupled with the success of the Make Portuguese Count campaign is a great proof point to the community about how when we do a concerted effort like that and we do work together collectively for a cause, we can have influence, right? And so if there was ever a doubt that, oh, we're too small and we're not going to make a difference, I think both of those conclusions contradict that and in a good way, right? So it's proof
and those
that
assumptions are flawed because we have people in all the states in the United States, but we are concentrated, and in those areas where we are concentrated, we have a lot of power and can increase our power more than what we have been exercising until now. The Portuguese American population in the United States is sustaining a consistent and stable demographic presence. Nonetheless, due to a significant decline in immigration from Portugal, lower birth rates, the passing of the post-1958 immigrant generation, and ongoing biological integration, it is unlikely that the Portuguese American population in the United States will experience substantial growth in the next few decades. The decline in immigration from Portugal is, to a limited extent, offset by the rising levels of immigration of Luso descendants from Portuguese diaspora communities in other countries. As we saw, this population experienced a significant growth of 36.1% from 2010 to 2011. However, this immigration remains relatively small when compared to the significant numbers that arrived from Portugal in the United States during the post-1958 immigration wave. A substantial portion of this population arrives in the US with high levels of education, illustrating a pattern of bimodal immigration. And since I mentioned that before, I'm going to skip the next sentence. Members of this population are significantly more inclined to speak Portuguese at home compared to US-born Luso descendants, and this trend suggests a continued demand for the teaching of Portuguese as a heritage language, and add to that the Cape Verdeans as well as the Brazilians. that also will benefit from the teaching of Portuguese as a heritage language. The state of Hawaii, where immigration from Portugal ceased relatively early, serves as a potential preview of what the entire Portuguese American population might look like demographically by the end of the 21st century, characterized by a small number of people born in Portugal and a modest percentage of people of single ancestry. This projection does not extend to the socio-economic achievement of Portuguese Americans in the mainland, which we expect will continue to grow. Overall, as the Portuguese American population ages, a gender imbalance becomes noticeable, with women outnumbering men beginning notably in their 20s. The gender imbalance is most pronounced among the elderly. The aging of the immigrant generation is particularly remarkable and holds great significance for those engaged in social services, as they cater to a population that may possess limited English speaking skills. Approximately 482,141 individuals, or 32% of the population, fall within the school age demographic, some even within daycare. It is imperative for our community to actively encourage and support the educational endeavors and leadership training among the younger generations. Portuguese Americans have successfully integrated into American society, surpassing in many states the average American population in terms of income and occupational status. Nevertheless, a notable disparity exists across the nation based on education, income, and occupational status, with evident variations between individuals living in states with long-standing Portuguese settlement history, including California, Hawaii, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, with New Jersey as the exception, and states like New York and Connecticut. And this distinction is particularly pronounced in states to which Portuguese Americans have been relocating, such as Texas and Washington. This interstate disparity underscores the necessity for improvement in educational achievement among the younger generations, especially in states with a significant history of Portuguese settlement. And that's all I have. Angela, do you want to take over and explain this?
Sure, and now we can take questions. I did see one person raise their hand, but we're not, everybody is on mute. So if you could type your question into the Q&A, and then we can read it out. This is just maintains audio quality for the webinar recording. We will be providing a copy of these slides on our website, and then the recording of this webinar will be up on YouTube and Facebook, and you can actually access all of PALCUS's YouTube videos via the PALCUS mobile app under media. So if you just go into your app store, look for PALCUS, download the app for free, and then go to media, and you'll be able to see all of our YouTube videos there. We will be creating a final report that in addition to this slide deck, and it eventually will be published on our website under community and the national surveys. And on that page, you can find our other reports that we have done in the past. We also
can add a narrative to the slides to explain what's in the slides. And some of them I just skipped through them and give more detail in the report.
Right. We are also hoping to work with each consul general to do deep dives on each consular area, so a little deeper dive, maybe not an hour and a half long, but we can get more granular on each consular area. So we will be doing those in the future. But for now, if anybody has any questions, now is the time to ask. We have a few minutes. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I will just, do you want to go to the next slide, Dulce?
Yes.
Do a little plug for PALCUS. So if you enjoyed this webinar, if you found it useful, we ask that you become a member, because membership is what allows us to host these webinars, to do this kind of research, and to continue serving as a resource for the community. Next slide, please.
Oops.
Oh, some of the benefits of membership are members-only content. You are able to get featured as a member spotlight in our newsletters. And then we are going to be starting a new newsletter and new business network where members will have priority in being featured in that network. And then we also have started Portuguese language discussion groups where members can participate in weekly 1-hour sessions where we are practicing our Portuguese language. All skills are welcome. And we are having a Portuguese teacher join us for each session so that if we have questions about how to pronounce something or if we're saying something wrong, they're there to correct us. And then, of course, we have special invites for members. You get some cool swag when you join. And then the best benefit of all is that you're supporting the only national organization serving Portuguese Americans in the country. We have a couple of questions that have come in, or just it says not a question, just a point of clarification regarding comments made previously. The Vice Consulate in Providence provides the same consular services as other consular posts other than visas, which don't affect Portuguese Americans, correct?
Yeah, I should have clarified that. There's the exception there, but honorary consuls was what I was referring to, not vice consuls.
Right.
Well, I was just wondering why it is that Rhode Island is also covered by the New Bedford Consulate, since they have their own consulate. So that's why I speculated that maybe the New Bedford Consulate provided services that the Rhode Island Consulate didn't. But most of it, what was the exception? There was one thing that they didn't.
Visas.
Okay.
Visas, but a lot of that's what we used to have in Los Angeles. For those from the West Coast might remember, we had a vice consul in Los Angeles that did the same service as the Consulate General of Portugal in San Francisco, or 90% of them anyway. But then these were changed to honorary consuls, but there are honorary consuls. There's one in Canada, in Winnipeg, that is still Paulo Cabral is an honorary consul and has the jurisdiction over that area and is capable of doing most services. So there are exceptions to rules, and obviously things can be changed. When people tell me that things can be changed, I always say, tell that to the April captains of 1974, that a dictatorship of 50 years could not be changed. So my question, Dulce, was, since we're waiting for questions, and I know we're going to start losing some of the students because their time is up. But I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. Obviously, and Angela and I have discussed this, not at length, but very briefly, the number in Hawaii is impressive.
Right.
It kind of shows, grassroots does work, because I think that's what those captains did. They did a lot of grassroots. I'm not saying others didn't. I'm just saying that they did. And it's shown there. Do you think that our demographics, from your concluding statements at the end, do you think, and of course, all indications are that at least, we're in 2023 already, almost 2024, and so in another 6 years, we're going to have another one of these things, 6.5 years. All our indications are that there isn't going to be immigration from Portugal, and I mean not the Portuguese-speaking countries, but from Portugal itself and the autonomous regions, because they are now receiving people, as you mentioned, in your talk. So do you think that there's a job to do to reach, because your indication also showed that at Portuguese Americans at home, we're not talking about the people who are learning Portuguese as a foreign language, and as you rightly pointed out, and I appreciate that, but people at home, only 22% speak Portuguese. So how do there has to be an effort in order for our numbers to grow, if they're going to grow, because people are going to pass away, the older generation. Right. And that's just the way, the rule of life. In order for these numbers to either maintain or growth, we're going to have to do in many states what Hawaii did. Or what are your thoughts on that? Because we all believe, and I think that's, we're not going to fool ourselves, that there are Americans of Portuguese ancestry, even though you can put multiple ethnicities, but that don't put Portuguese,
Right.
Remember, and I have students in my classroom that have told me that in the past, that are 2021.
So your question is about how we increase our numbers.
How we maintain them, or even increase them using the Hawaii example, basically.
Right, yeah. Well, one good thing is that now the Census Bureau allows you to put more than 2 ancestries. And so people have more freedom to put more ancestries. But I think the Make the Portuguese Count campaign should be repeated in the next census as well. And even to inform people, even if you are a fourth or a fifth Portuguese, enter your Portuguese ancestry. Diasporas can die over time, but they can also be revived, right? And die again. But efforts to revive our diaspora include efforts to revive the sense of identity, or in people, and then they may say, yeah, I'm Portuguese, and then they're curious about their Portuguese ancestry. They may travel to Portugal, and that's good for Portugal. And they may then engage in communal actions with others that also identify as Portuguese Americans. So it's a question of getting people to identify as Portuguese Americans.
I think also with the growing popularity of the ancestry testing, right? The 23andMe and Ancestry.com, people are discovering
that they are
Portuguese, and I had no idea. And so where they would have never marked Portuguese before on an ancestry question, they may, right? And so to your point, keeping the Make Portuguese Count,
in discovering their Portuguese roots and engaging in Portuguese cultural activities in the United States and so forth. So in that sense, I think that we do have the possibility of maintaining. It's possible that immigration from other countries, of Luso descendants from other countries, will continue to increase, although that depends on US immigration policies. So, we really have no way of knowing. Like the people from Venezuela, they started coming after the regime there collapsed, and a lot of people are from Madeira. Some of them went back to Madeira, but some also came to the United States. So,
in fact, if I'm not mistaken, and if anyone from Florida is on the line here today, but it was a group of Venezuelan Portuguese that recently started the Portuguese Club of Miami.
Okay.
So it's quite interesting, that they have immigrated to Florida from Venezuela, and they have started a Portuguese club there.
Yeah.
So quite
they
interesting.
Probably had one in Venezuela.
Probably, yes.
I have also another question, Dulce, and a concern, which is that California, although we have a lot of good things going on, including the number being the largest, but obviously in a state of almost 40 million, but the levels of education concern me. I think they're changing. I'm hoping, and I think that all data, future data will indicate that that's happening in rural California, but not just rural California, in suburbs of Los Angeles, Artesia, Fullerton, those areas right there. And even in the Bay Area, Angela knows that area well. There's been a lower indication of what we would like to see of Americans of Portuguese ancestry going to college, getting advanced degrees. So my question to you is, this tells us there's a bit of work to be done in the Portuguese California community.
California,
raise
Rhode
that up at
Island,
least another 3 or 4 points.
There is a bit of work. Now, the levels of education in California, as you know from another presentation I did with you, Denise, vary a lot by whether people are in urban centers or in rural areas. And I believe, if you own a business that is related to agriculture or to dairy and so forth, then maybe you think that your children don't need an education because they're going to inherit your business and they're going to do very well, and there's no need for an education. Now, the ones living in the cities, particularly the Portuguese Americans that are in Silicon Valley, have huge levels of education. It's just that even with that group there, the rest of California has low levels of education, that they still come out short in education overall. But I think that the work needs to be done primarily in the rural areas of California, in the Central Valley and so forth.
That's what we're trying to do at Fresno State.
But in the presentation that I did with you before, we realized that there's more political representation from Central Valley, and you asked me to think about why, and during the presentation I didn't think, but the thing is, if you work in Silicon Valley making $200,000 a year, you give that up to go run for office and make much less, right? So I think that, but the other thing is that people that own farms and own land and own businesses, they are much more interested and invested in influencing politics, right? That political decisions regarding water, regarding several other issues affect their business directly. So they have more of an interest in influencing the political process themselves. Whereas those working in Silicon Valley, well, you know, they can have the big companies, Google and Microsoft, influence politics. They don't need to do it themselves, right?
Yeah, indeed. Entrepreneurs need to have a bigger voice, and I think,
Right.
you know, when we talked a little bit off the, you know, on the side of the conference that you and I were attending about this, which is in the Valley, it has a lot to do with agriculture. I mean, agriculture a few years ago, quite a few years ago, began thinking we need to organize in order to have a lobby, you know, a voice within state politics, like all the other industries did, you know, tourism and everything else. And so I think it has to do because of the Portuguese in that. Just one brief comment, and you know, we're talking about the educational level and the level of Portuguese also in, you know, more opportunities for people to take Portuguese if they so wish. Unfortunately in California, the emphasis is on high school and not on elementary school, unfortunately. High school and
don't really have a very good measure of how many people speak Portuguese in the United States. The Foreign Language Association publishes data on how many people are studying a language, but at the college level. But beyond that, at the high school level, at the lower school levels, we don't really have data. And I don't know how we could go about collecting data on that, on who it is that's learning Portuguese. But also, you got, when it comes to a language, people have abilities at various levels in the language. They may speak a few words, or they may speak a lot. They may speak but not write. So it would be interesting to also measure that. Usually, you don't become fluent in a language unless you have an immersion experience, right? So it becomes very important if we want to encourage Portuguese among Luso descendants and others, that we provide that immersion either in Portugal or in another country where Portuguese is the official language.
Yeah, I think that we have to tie up a few things, and let me give a plug, if I may, Angela. And I'm not going to give a plug to any particular organization, but to this idea. So it actually was launched very recently. We have a Portuguese gentleman here. His grandfather was an immigrant from the Porto area, Randy Ataid, who has started an organization here many years ago in California called Friends of Portugal. They do a lot of entrepreneurship with Portugal. And Randy has started a scholarship program, him and his family at Fresno State, for students who are business majors, but that take a Portuguese course. Yeah. And so that's why I think the kind of stuff that we need to be a bit more creative, not expecting every single student who takes college level courses in a U.S. university, private or public, to do a minor in Portuguese or to do a major in Portuguese. Yeah.
Or to speak Portuguese fluently.
Right, or to speak Portuguese fluently, indeed. But if they, you know, I think we need to tie it to this. If we can tie more and more of these scholarships to, listen, you're doing a civil engineer degree, but if you take a Portuguese course, if you take Portuguese 1 and 2 as an elective, because, you know, students always have to fill in electives, and languages are usually required for a general ed as well. One of the categories, and so you can get this scholarship. So I think we need to, you know, and here in the Valley, that's why we've pushed for this. Here in the Central Valley, as Angela knows well, there is an abundance, and that's great, of different scholarships for agricultural students. So why not tie that to, and there's a lot of Portuguese Americans, those that you mentioned a few minutes ago, Dulce, that are now of first or second generation born here. They want their sons and their daughters to go to college, even if they come back to the dairy, because they know that they have other skills and other, it's a total different world than it was for them, and much different for their grandparents. And so I think we need to tie scholarships to this. I think do an business major, but take some Portuguese courses and get a scholarship. We have to find, because we find that donors, and I just got this education today, so I want to share with everybody, donors are more in tune sometimes, not with their ethnicity, but with the business that they're in, what they've developed. I mean, if you're a PR person and you're passionate about that, you want more, and you've done well in PR, Angela, you want more students to do that. You want more of people of your ethnicity to do that. And so you tend to just, donate to a good PR school that you can offer that to others. So we need to kind of do that, what people are passionate about in their own life, and mix in a little bit of Portuguese, and just that thinking, because I think what your study shows, and thank you so much for your work. I really mean that, as you know that. Thank you so much for your work. What your study shows is that we have so much potential, but we're still thinking inside that darn box.
Yeah.
Shatter that box.
Not everywhere, right? Just in California, Massachusetts, Rhode Island.
Yeah, but even for example, in we can turn around to the other states out of education. So New Jersey, we're doing well in education, but we don't have any representation. We don't have any. I mean, at the local level, we have a few, yes, but we do not have any representation in Congress or the Senate. Or I think there's one or two at the state level, very, very few. So we have work in all of these different areas,
right, exactly.
But we just need to, your study shows us that we have to think outside the box, whether it be in political representation, education, business, etc. And thank you for that.
Yeah. So we have come to the end of our presentation, and I know that there's so much more to talk about, but as we mentioned, we will be doing some follow-up presentations, digging deeper into consular areas. I think we're going to do a repeat of the presentation you did in the Azores, Dulce. So please, if you haven't signed up for the PALCUS newsletter, please do so, and you will be sure to be notified on when we are hosting these future presentations. But thank you, Dulce, for always doing such a wonderful job with the data. We're so lucky to have you and be working with you. And you're documenting our community for history, and such an important.
I don't think of myself as a numbers person, but I enjoy seeing the patterns that emerge.
It's really interesting. That's helpful for us.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Could I ask one final question?
Just gotta make it quick.
Okay, Dulce, do you believe that we spend too much time talking about communities and not enough time about diaspora? Because I feel I have to explain the word 150 times, every month.
Diaspora.
So, feel as a community that we even.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of debate about what the definition of diaspora is, but I do think that referring to ourselves as a community and as a diaspora interchangeably is okay, because without the community existing, you don't have a diaspora. That's one of the things that you need to have the diaspora, is that there is actually a separate community from the mainstream US that is distinct, that maintains its own culture and its own practices and its own identity associated with the homeland, which is Portugal, right? So if we don't have communities, we don't have diaspora. That's why I say we can use them interchangeably.
Got it. Okay, and with that, thank you again, Dulce. Thank you, Denise and CPAC and PPBI for partnering with us on this presentation. Thank you to all of those who joined us live and sent in questions. And if you're watching this presentation later on, thank you for watching. And we would love to hear from you. So please send us any feedback to palcus@palcus.org. And with that, we'll say até já, and thank you so much. Obrigada.
Deus. Até a próxima.
Deus. Tchau.